Hi, thank you for coming out tonight. We did not anticipate what a celebrity Dennis Doordan was in Santa Barbara. So, sorry for those of you that are standing room only. We've managed to pull every chair in the building into this room. But if anybody prefers to stand, I think there might be a few people that really would like to sit. It's up to you. But anyway, thank you for coming out tonight. So glad to have you all here. And I think, Dennis, you must be at least as famous as Ansel Adams. So I'm just going to introduce our speaker. Oh, actually, I'll start off. I'm Chris Rupp. I'm the interim director of the museum. And then Ella Jennings. Ella, do you want to wave? Ella is our community engagement coordinator and a curatorial assistant who helped plan this and put it all together. And the email you got about the event was from her. So Dennis Doordan was trained as an architectural and design historian. He's a design educator, critic, museum consultant, and editor. He has a BA in art history from Stanford, a PhD in the history of architecture from Columbia University. He taught 28 years at Notre University and is professor emeritus of the School of Architecture. And he's currently a commissioner on the Historic Landmarks Commission for the city of Santa Barbara. So thank you for being with us tonight, Dennis. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. We didn't talk too much, so it will be a surprise to me. Yeah, take us away.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming out. And I'll try to make it worth your while to stand up for a while. As Chris said, I'm the historian of architecture. I'm not a photo historian. There are people in this room who know far more about making a photograph than I do. But I do know about architecture and about Los Angeles in the years that these photos are covered. So that's what I want to talk about this afternoon. Let's get it right. I also need to say up front, I have a throat condition, and this is my normal voice. So I appreciate your patience and your bearing with that. Now, this is a gallery, a museum gallery. It's not a classroom, so this is not a classroom lecture. I don't have a PowerPoint. There'll be no quiz at the end. And you are free to move around if you want to, during the course of the presentation, to look at different photos. And I want to start off by making just a comment about the installation, because to get to this crowded space, you have to walk through that first gallery. And that first gallery is a set of photographs, most of which Ansel Adams made before the photos you see in this room. And they are some of the classic images that we associate with Ansel Adams. And I'll give you a one-line summation of this whole presentation in case you have to leave early. Ansel Adams' heart is out there. His wallet is in this room. And that's what we'll be talking about. So let's start out there in that first gallery. That's the Ansel Adams that we know. Yosemite Valley, Monolith, the face of Half Dome, Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico. These are not just great photos of the American West. I want to suggest they are great American photos because they strike a resonant chord in American thought about nature and the place of nature in an American identity. Now, as a child, as a young boy, Ansel Adams had an eccentric education. And he was homeschooled for a while, often by his father. And together with his father, he read, as a young boy, Ralph Waldo Emerson. This was a formative intellectual and perhaps spiritual experience for Ansel Adams. And I said there wasn't going to be a quiz, but there is a reading assignment. Go read Emerson. read Emerson's essay on the oversoul, and then look at the photos in that first gallery. Emerson talks about what he calls the wise silence and the universal beauty, which is accessible to all. What Emerson described in words, Ansel Adams captured in photographs, and that's what's in that first gallery. Also, when you're out there looking at those photos, ask yourself, what time is it? It's never 7:45 p.m. or 9:12 a.m. Time is seasonal. It's lunar. In a photograph like Moonrise Hernandez, New Mexico, the moment is timeless. Adams was friends with the American poet Robinson Jeffers, who lived up the coast in Carmel. Adams admired Jeffers a great deal, thought he was a great voice of American thought. And Robinson Jeffers, talking about the landscape around Big Sur that he wrote about, the ranches around Big Sur, said, this is Robinson Jeffers, I could see people living amid magnificent, unspoiled scenery, essentially as they had in Norse sagas or in the time of Homer. Here was contemporary life that was also permanent life. And I think that what is permanent, what endures, was important to Adams. Seasons change, weather comes and goes, but the lithic solidity, the stony silence of El Capitan, for example, endures. And when Adams photographed a building like St. Francis Church in Rancho de Taos, which is out there, when he photographs a building like that, he gave it the same calm, stoic solidity, the same wise silence of the mountains that he loved. So the step from that gallery to this gallery is a huge one. And as I said earlier, it is the difference between his heart and his wallet. Now, we know a lot about this project because Adams talked about it in his autobiography, which is a very good read. It's a very accessible book, and he really, in very plain language, explains what he was about. And he says early in the autobiography, the decision to devote my life to photography brought with it the problem of how I was to earn a living. The solution was to work as a commercial photographer. And over the lean years of the Great Depression, I did everything from catalogs to industrial reports, architecture to portraiture. Sound familiar to some of the people in this room? Now, one of those jobs was for Forbes magazine. Forbes was a business magazine founded in 1917. And Forbes was noted for its attention to design, the layout, the graphic design of the covers, the information design in the articles. So it was not surprising that Forbes would commission someone like Ansel Adams to shoot work for the magazine. And I want to point out, over in that corner, they actually have a copy of the issue of Forbes magazine that this work appeared in. When you have a chance, I urge you to go over and take a look at the article and read it. Now, December of 1940, Franklin Delano Roosevelt delivered one of his famous fireside chats, in which he explained that even though the US was not at war, this is December of 1940, America must become the arsenal of democracy. And Forbes asked Ansel Adams to photograph aircraft factories in Los Angeles for a story that appeared in the March 1941 issue. So we know that Ansel Adams was on the job. He's wandering around Los Angeles in December of 1940 and January of 1941. And I mentioned the issue on review. If you have a chance to read it, it's worth it for two reasons. First, there's a very clear sense in the article that war is coming. There's a comment about it might seem odd that these new aircraft factories are on the West Coast where they're vulnerable to attack. The other comment, there is a kind of East Coast snide take on Southern California. The article is called The City of Angels. And at one point, the journalist writing the piece said, quote, an atmosphere, talking about Los Angeles, the city of angels, an atmosphere in which it is often hard to tell where the domain of the colonic irrigation specialist leaves off and a new religion begins. This part of the country has always been a little cracked. It's the most wonderful place in the world to start a new ism, a new religion, or a new business. People fall for it here a little bit more. In preparing for this, I Googled colonic irrigation specialist. I'm definitely on the side of religion. So that's Forbes' take on Los Angeles. We know that the assignment was a challenge for Adams. He talks in his autobiography that the weather refused to cooperate. It rained a lot while he was here. And when it didn't rain, it was cloudy. And also, he didn't like Los Angeles very much. A man who had spent most of the previous decade taking the photographs in that first room is now walking around Los Angeles. He didn't like Los Angeles, although he did like working for Forbes, because Forbes never questioned his expense account. At one point, he calls back to New York and says, the weather's terrible, what do you want me to do? And they said, just keep shooting, put it on the expense account. Right, you are. Commercial work was a different kind of challenge for Adams. Unlike the fine art photography, in which he worked in the darkroom and printed himself, for a job like this, he shot the scenes and sent the film to his client for processing. He loses control of the process, which was very important to him as an artist. And he really didn't have much say in what was selected for publication. Right? That's one of the challenges for him of commercial photography. And it raised this issue in his mind, and in the mind, frankly, of his generation. Was photography a fine art, or what made it a fine art? And it was not just snapping the shutter, it was controlling the whole process and manipulating the image in the darkroom as you printed it. And you lost all of that when you did commercial work. So let's look at the results. In the first gallery, I asked the question, what time is it in those photographs? In this gallery, there's a very different awareness of time. Time in this gallery is mechanical time. That is time that can be measured precisely. It is lunchtime or it's 5 o'clock. And time is present throughout these photos, because as soon as you take a picture of a newsstand, and there's a couple of newsstands in this, you're taking a picture of time. And based on the weekly magazines and the daily newspapers that are on display on the newsstand, and for example, Lockheed Newsstand View number 5 over on that side, we know that he was there on January the 6th, 1941, because that issue of Life magazine had Katharine Hepburn on the cover. So there's an element of time being very present. And if you look at the people in these photographs, who are they? A lot of what I want to suggest is what kind of questions you ask when you're walking through an exhibit like this. So who are these people? For the most part, they're anonymous. They're a bunch of guys on their lunch hour, or men leaving work at the end of a shift. And I find Ansel Adams' photos of these men and women curiously flat and out of sync with images of American labor in the 1930s. The 30s are filled with images of American labor that are frankly heroic. Lewis Hines photographed the steelworkers who built the Empire State Building, and he photographed them as daring, muscular men who could build structures that literally scraped the sky. Or think of Dorothea Lange's portraits of migrants, the Okies that John Steinbeck wrote about. Adams knew and admired Lange. He knew this whole generation. He knew and admired Lange. Her photos, done in the mid-1930s, of farm workers, including migrants just up the road in Napomo. One of her most famous photographs is of a woman farm worker in Napomo. In her photographs, she gave them a quiet dignity. You see them as hardworking individuals, just trying to get through hard times. You look long enough at Lang's photos, and you come to know these people. You never really get to know these people in most of these photographs. You learn they live lives surrounded by automobiles and living in trailers with sheds that were crafted from leftover airplane engine crates. See the series on life on the Olympic Trailer Court, which is over in this alcove. So they're surrounded by crates. They're surrounded by automobiles. Adams was taking pictures of parking lots and taking pictures of a gas station in Los Angeles in those years. Now, it's 800 miles from Henderson, New Mexico to Burbank, California. But more than 800 miles separates those two places. The people living in trailers and the leftover machine crates, this just wasn't something that Adams could wrap his mind around. And I think that comes through in the way they're photographed. There is, I think, an important photo in this exhibition. Lockheed Plant in Burbank, view from afar, which is the large photo in the middle of that wall. And it's one of the important photos in the exhibit. You see mountains, which is a favorite Ansel Adams subject matter, a factory, telephone poles, a train, and a man. Now, ever since Henry David Thoreau devoted a long passage in Walden to a description of the Fitchburg Railroad that ran along one side of Walden Pond, the railroad engines have been a potent symbol of modernity and the encroachment of industrial civilization in the landscape. And here it is on a collision course with that single man. If you continue those two lines of travel, that train's going to run him over. I'll also point out that the great Ansel Adams photographs in the first gallery, they're, with a few exceptions, El Capitan, they're very strong horizontals and tiers of black and white. The telephone poles, the oil derricks, the vertical lines in the gallery in this room tend to be marks of modernity for Adams. And they're not always, they're the signs, the emblems, the arrival of industrial civilization, of modern communications, of timeliness in these scenes. And I think it's interesting that in the photo I'm talking about, the man is lined up exactly. His spine is continued in that vertical line of the telegraph pole, the telephone pole. And he has his face turned away from us. And we're wondering what happens to that man as he marches towards the train. So the juxtaposition that's going on there, the factory in the mountains, the man in the train. Juxtaposition is a compositional strategy here. We see it also in cemetery statue and oil derricks, Long Beach, California, which is around the corner in that alcove, which is apparently the only image out of this whole assignment that Adams ever printed himself, right? So it was clearly an image that resonated for him. The human figure here is in the form of an angel, juxtaposed against a bleak forest of oil derricks, white against black. Human form against the engineered form of the derricks. It is a figure of mourning. It's in a cemetery. And I think that is Adams's comment. He is mourning what is happening around him. Forbes, by the way, did print that image, but renamed it Peace. Now, can you imagine how Adams felt about that renaming? Now, during this assignment, Adams crisscrossed Los Angeles. He really was from Burbank to Santa Monica, the Beverly Hills. He was all around. And he photographed various kinds of buildings that had little or nothing to do directly with his assignment from Forbes. These are simply Ansel Adams looking at Los Angeles. And one of them, the May Company store on Wilshire Boulevard, which is around the corner in that alcove. And it's still there. It's at Wilshire and Fairfax. It's now the Museum of the Motion Picture part of that building. This was one of the important new landmarks in LA modern architecture when Adams arrived. It had been finished in late 1939. Adams is there a year later. It was designed by A.C. Martin and Samuel Marks, big commercial firm who did a lot of large work all around LA. And when you look at that photo, it has a fabulous corner with a simple plane wrapped around a golden volume. It has some of the spatial aesthetic of European modernism, combined with the sophisticated adaptation of a traditional building type, the department store, to the emerging car culture of Southern California. In fact, apparently, I'm talking about it as a very abstract form. The volume wrapped by the plane with good modern sans serif type Sandy May store. In the early 40s, that building was nicknamed, that corner was described as a perfume bottle because this was a department store. Now, it's a nice photograph of an exciting modern building, brand new when he was there. Is it a great Ansel Adams photograph? I don't think so. And I don't think so because I've taken that same photograph. In fact, anyone who's ever gone there has taken that photograph. You cross the street, stand on the corner, wait for the red light to turn red, traffic to stop, snap it. Then if you want to try a different exposure, you wait through the cycle, wait for the red light, traffic stops, snap it again. I know a lot of architectural photographers, and they'll talk about buildings that tell you how to shoot it, where to stand, what time of day, which way to look, how to frame it, what to crop out. So it's an important documentary kind of photography. For Ansel Adams, was it fine art photography? Was it where his heart was? I don't think so. And I can't imagine that being dictated to by a modern building. I can't imagine how Ansel Adams felt about that. But as he tells us in his autobiography, Forbes wanted pictures of exotic indigenous architecture, such as the Brown Derby. And there were many such awful, this is Adams's word, many such awful examples around Los Angeles. And Brown Derby, which is no longer extant, but there's a photograph of it right around in that corner. So he shot the Brown Derby, and he shot other buildings like that, because that's what the folks back east thought California was about. The Brown Derby, by the way, a building shaped like a hat, like a Brown Derby, which was the home for the Brown Derby restaurant. Architectural historians tend to, one of the words we use for that, one word we use for that is wacky and fun, but a more official term is programmatic architecture. And programmatic architecture, which was very popular in Los Angeles in the 20s and 30s, was a reaction to the arrival of the automobile. Commercial structures that were designed in shapes that reflect the nature of the business being carried out inside. It was a design strategy, a gimmick to attract the attention of the passing motorist, because the motorist is moving much faster than a pedestrian. So you're not going to have a fine art sign. You're going to have a big dramatic gimmick that gets their attention. Chris mentioned I'm on the Historic Landmarks Commission of Santa Barbara. And one of the things that we're proud of and try to police in Santa Barbara is, in fact, signage. We want signs with lettering that can be read by the pedestrian. And we don't like neon signs, and we don't like big billboards. That's my 2 cents. So, in the 20th century, the automobile increasingly becomes a form determinant for architectural designs. And architects worried about the impact of speed on our ability to perceive, literally to read urban space. Signage grew dramatically in size, or in the case of Brown Derby, the building itself becomes the sign. Accommodating parking was another issue. In the May Company building, the entry from the rear parking lot became more important than the traditional main door on the street. And that was very much a factor. And Adams, I think, at least recognized that, all the photos of the parking lots. And I've mentioned time. As soon as you have a photograph of an automobile in the scene, you've dated it. You have a particular moment. You know what year that car is from. So he dutifully went around taking pictures of the wacky examples of programmatic architecture. But he didn't like it. He couldn't warm up to the wacky, car-crazy fun of some buildings. For example, Oceanfront Promenade, view number 1, which is the photo right here. This is urban space as a cacophony of a jumble of shapes, a competition between architectural forms and advertising signage. A contrast almost any of his architectural photos that he takes in here with the image of the St. Francis Church at Rancho de Taos out there. And you'll see right away the difference that he's working through. But here's what's interesting, for me at least, about these photos in 2026. Adams didn't like this stuff. But a generation later, a lot of American architects would find these buildings inspirational. In 1966, 25 years after Adams looked at these buildings, an architect named Robert Venturi published a very slim book called Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture. It's considered by many architectural historians to be the book that launched postmodernism in architecture. And Venturi describes two types of buildings. Buildings like the Brown Derby or the Pop Cafe, which is also on the wall here. This is programmatic architecture, in which the building assumes a dramatic form to call attention to itself. And the other kind of buildings were like the Automotive Service and Maintenance Center, which is hung right next to the Brown Derby around the corner. Or 800 Wilshire, which is also in that alcove. And these buildings are very simple rectangular boxes with huge giant signs that you can see in a car 2 blocks away. So you have a building shaped like the Brown Derby or a little box with a great big sign. For Venturi, Denise Scott Brown, Charles Moore, the architects who began to make a pilgrimage to Los Angeles to see, to find these buildings before they all disappeared. They saw these buildings as an antidote to the sterile forms of European modernism as it was taking root in American architecture after World War II. So, as I said, soon architects like Robert Venturi and Charles Moore were making pilgrimages to look at buildings that Ansel Adams had to be paid to look at. And that's the 25 years difference. Now, last set of photos that I want to comment on, because I want to leave time for questions, for discussion, and I can't talk about each and every single photograph. But there is a last set of photos that I want to comment on, and that returns us to the first gallery, where you will find an image labeled Winter Sunrise, Sierra Nevada, from Lone Pine, California, taken in 1944. In the wonderful booklet that was produced for this show, you can read the story of that photograph. And I want to complete that story in a way. We are back where Adams felt his heart most intensely, and back in his phenomenal rather than industrial sense of time, a winter sunrise. But time intrudes on that image nonetheless. It's wartime. In 1942, Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed an executive order. We're all familiar with executive orders these days. FDR signed an executive order authorizing the relocation of Americans of Japanese ancestry to inland camps away from the West Coast. In late 1943 and early 1944, Adams photographed one of these camps, Manzanar, located near Lone Pine. And it was while on that assignment that he took that picture out there. And I want to circulate two images of Manzanar that Adams took. So I have just two copies of two images, and I'm just going to ask you to pass them around and share them. And look at them and think about them in connection with the photo out there. The photo in the gallery is a classic Adams image. It's a work of art. It's fine art. And I want to, the two images are from, let me start over. So he documented Manzanar, and he exhibited the photographs of Manzanar in an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City in 1944. And he published them in a book called Born Free and Equal, Photographs of the Loyal Japanese Americans at Manzanar Relocation Center in Inyo County, California. Now the photo out there is a classic Adams image. And the two that I'm circulating, ask you to compare them with Winter Sunrise at Lone Pine or Moonrise in Hernandez, New Mexico. Compositionally, they have strong similarities. The human presence, the settlement, Henderson, New Mexico, is really set very low in the foreground and set against a majestic mountain landscape and a dramatic sky. The difference is that Manzanar was not a timeless human settlement. It was a camp. And the huts are arranged according to the geometric order that is an alien intrusion on the land. It's echoes of the telephone poles and the square little boxes of the trailer camp. So I want to suggest that the photos that I'm sending around don't quite have the same quality of beauty. Or if they have a beauty, which the best of Adams's work does, it is an unsettling beauty. They are unsettling photographs. First, because building those camps was a shameful chapter in American history, and unsettling because we are building camps again. Now, final comment. I said at the beginning that this is not a classroom. It's a college museum gallery. So this is a learning space. And this exhibition is a terrific demonstration of what a college gallery can contribute to the educational mission of a college like Westmont, or any college that has a gallery. In a true learning space, issues are raised and questions are asked in a setting that supports discourse, that gives you evidence, that gives you prompts, that says respond to this, think about this, look at this, be attentive. Ralph Waldo Emerson and Ansel Adams engaged in a dialogue about the American soul and the oversoul to which we belong. That is certainly an assignment worthy of any college class, thinking about a conversation across generations. But on another level, this exhibition is a perfect place to talk about one of the major concerns of college students everywhere: how to pay the rent and develop their talents, how to make a living and stay true to their ideals. What can Ansel Adams teach us about answers to these questions? And for all of us who live in and who love California, what is the fate of the great American spaces Ansel Adams captured so eloquently and made us see so deeply? Thank you for your attention. I promised Chris that I would leave time for questions or for discussion. I'm interested in people's reactions to the material that they're looking at.
As I walked around the exhibit here, I could feel Ansel Adams grinding his teeth.
Yes, and I think one of the things, I didn't talk too much about it, but there are some photos in here that he took in Santa Monica, where he's trying to photograph the ocean and the mountains in the background. And he has some people, again, the people standing with their back to the camera. It's not about people. And he's trying some of the same compositional features, mountains in the distance, dramatic sky, and some ocean in the foreground. He's trying, but I don't think he likes LA. I think what he liked about it was the expense account, but that was about it.
Yeah, related to that point, so many of these photos, they're about the buildings, it's the geography of modern LA, well, modern at the time. And the people are either non-existent or ancillary.
Yeah.
But your comments on Manzanar suggest that he's thinking about humanity while he's taking. Do you want to comment on some of that?
And when he went to Manzanar to photograph Manzanar, and he got to know the people, and there are some very warm, sympathetic portraits of individuals. So he could do it once he got to know you. And I think that might be the key. He was here for a couple of weeks, wandering around in the rain, saying, when can I get out of here? But he went back to Manzanar with a different motivation. And there he saw people, and that's what he photographed. There also, one of the photographs in that alcove is of a very Baroque apartment building called the Princess. And Forbes picked that up, and the caption in the magazine was, "Somebody calls this home." Like those wacky Californians, they're living in fantasy. But that's a very good point about when he can and cannot see people.
Coming back to one of the points you made in the room before you concluded, the photos he made in Manzanar were not commercially successful in any fashion. They were not well received.
No.
But as an artist and as a person of integrity, he put them out there, just as he did as an advocate for conservation and preservation of the environment. There's a message there for contemporary times and the role that artists play in our society and how important that kind of communication is.
And I want to, it's a great comment, and I want to build on it a little bit, because most of the images out there, images that come from his heart, were taken before this work. And I think that he became Ansel Adams, not just the photographer, but the man with a set of ideals and a commitment to a cause of conservation. And he comes to LA and sees all these oil rigs and these oil fields, and he can't wrap his mind around it. But also, I think he had become a man of his own integrity, his own sense of self. So he went to Manzanar, knowing that that was not a popular thing to do. The exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York was not well received, and he talks about that. And he talks in the autobiography, or I forget whether it's the autobiography, but he mentions getting letters from parents who had lost sons in the Pacific, and how he understood that he didn't know what to say to them, but he knew that Manzanar was wrong. And that comes through in the book. He knew Manzanar was wrong. It's also ironic when, again, we go back and read the Forbes, and they're worried, why have all these aircraft factories so close to the coast? And in fact, what they wound up doing was moving American citizens away from the coast. So there's levels of irony in this.
I have a question for you. How did you come about getting these photographs?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I should probably talk to you. The photographs of Los Angeles are property of the Los Angeles Public Library. Ansel Adams, when he received the photographs back from Fortune, he put them in a drawer, and they basically languished for 20 plus years. Upon his move to Carmel, he kind of rediscovered the images, and as Dennis referred to in the letter on the wall, you can see he didn't really care much for them, but he did recognize their historical value. And there's a funny comment in the letter where he says, if the city doesn't want them or the library doesn't want them, feel free to put them in the incinerator. So the library purchased the images from him. The images only exist on negative form. They were only ever printed as contact sheets. And so the images were not printed individually. And so the library owns the contact sheets and the negatives. All the negatives were scanned at very high resolution. They were shot on 120 film originally, so pretty large format. And these images were made for the exhibition from the library scans.
But how was it that Westmont was interested in this and bought?
Yeah, that's another story. These images were featured on California Gold with Huell Hauser in 2008. I saw the episode, and it has been kind of sitting in the back of my mind for a long time. And so that's initially how I made contact with the library and started the conversation. They haven't been shown very much. The library did a show at the public library of some of the works. There's 217 images. You can see they all say view 1, view 2, view 14. That's because if you look at all the images, he shot multiples of a lot of them. And so I selected the ones that I thought were the best image of those groups. The library's show tended to focus more on the images with people in them, and I omitted some of those in my selections. The other place that I know that they've been shown is in 2012 or 13. They were shown at Bergamot Station in conjunction with one of the Pacific Standard Time exhibitions.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
I grew up there.
I want to ask one question. The photograph of the angel against the oil derricks around the corner, which was the only one that Adams himself valued enough to print. Westmont actually has that, right?
Yes.
In your collection.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another sort of serendipitous story. We were planning this exhibition, and there was a big photography auction happening in LA at an auction house, and it just so happens that that image was included in the auction. It's considered pretty scarce. They don't know quite how many he printed, but it's one of his scarce images, and so we had the opportunity to buy it for our collection and then show it along with the body of work that it was originally taken with.
Yeah.
Can you give some insight into his personality, his mood, his relationship with his wife, extended family, that was going on in his life all the way through?
Not so much about his family, but I do know, I mentioned he read Ralph Waldo Emerson with his father. He was very close to his father, and that was a warm, important relationship. And I have to imagine a young boy and his father reading Emerson together, and it left a lifelong impact on him. The other comment that I'll make is really, I didn't say anything about humor, because there isn't much in this show. But if you look at individual photographs, there's one here called The Big Five. It's a little tiny store with a big sign saying The Big Five. And there's 5 big guys standing in front. And I think that's as close as he came to cracking a smile the whole time he was in Los Angeles.
One of my favorite photos is based on humor. It's this photo here where clearly the focal point of the image is the no parking sign hemmed in by cars. Any other questions?
Can I just make it not Well, I was looking at, we had this overlap as you were talking, so I could see some of the photos you were looking at. Westmont compared this before and after, like his photo and then what it looks like today, I guess, is a current photo. So anyone who wants to do a really deep dive, there's a couple comments here in the.
You know, I'll make one comment. That's a wonderful book. It's a fabulous supporting document for the exhibition. It also makes a comment about what this show is about. The stuff out there is timeless and it endures and it's still there. The LA that he was sent to shoot was disappearing, is wiped away. So a lot of the photos then and now in that book are completely different places, which is why 25 years later, Robert Venturi and Charles Moore were hurrying back here to see that stuff before it was gone.
I'm glad the Bay Company survived.
And it survived because it's a historical landmark building. Yeah, the book, there's only maybe 4 or 5 copies in the gallery. They sit in here throughout the exhibition. But Ella and I, we were able to track down quite a few of the locations and their actual exact addresses. And so we spent a couple days in LA going to these sites and trying to replicate the same spot in the photo. And so the book basically has Adam's image with today's duplicate image, and you can see what changed and what hasn't changed. Sometimes there's still the structure and bones of a certain building there. In a few cases, they're almost exactly the same. And then in other cases, there's giant high-rise apartment buildings or, yeah, different things in those locations today.
The cars are still there.
Yeah. And the people. Other questions? Yeah.
You took a lot of pictures of parking lots, or supposed parking lots, but now we have a big push because we all are concerned about housing in the state. And the laws that are being passed now are saying, get rid of the cars, we don't need parking, etc. But you mentioned in your discussion his probably dislike for Los Angeles because it was car-centric. And we've fallen in love with the automobile. I don't know if we've fallen out of love with the automobile. So, is this the last of photographers of seeing parking lots?
He's an architect, and he's raising an architectural issue that's very much on the front burner these days for all of us, and what the state of California is doing. And no, the debate about parking is not over. And we're going to see, but we'll also begin to see photographs of the bicycle racks, the rental bike racks all over town. You'll start seeing photographs of those.
Question over here.
I'm just curious, are you going to do this lecture before the exhibit is over at the end of March one more time, or no?
We hadn't planned to, but maybe we could talk Dennis into it. We did videotape it, so it potentially will go onto our website as well. Yeah.
Pass it on to some friends.
Yes. So thank you all for coming out. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you to Dennis. And sorry for those of you that had to stand a little more than you wanted to. I'll also point out we made this exhibition brochure in conjunction with the exhibition. Feel free to grab one on the way out. They're free. Tell friends and family about the show and come back and visit us.